Welcome, everyone, back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast, episode 13. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about, in memoriam, the Wednesday Night Wars. They were maybe a little bit more short lived than people thought, and they went a very specific way that I don't know how many people expected them to go. But I guess I'll start with this, Jason. When you think about the Wednesday Night Wars, when you think about this era that is coming to an end, what will you remember first?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is the big partisanship we saw between WWE fans and AEW fans. Like it seemed like from the beginning that you had to take a side. You had to take a side for WWE defending them because I guess a $1 billion company needs defending, but you also need to defend AEW because if you defended WWE, you're seen as some corporate shill. Like you didn't want a to succeed for whatever reason. Like I don't think anyone out there, for any reasonable person, wanted AEW to fail. It was just that, like, hey, both companies are both doing good things, but you couldn't acknowledge that for whatever reason, and especially for both sides of the aisle between WWE and AEW fans. And so that's part of my biggest takeaway of just this war between mostly the fans of really the hardcores of each company.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. When it comes to like biggest takeaway, I just think about the toxic divide that has taken place. And I'm in it pretty deep because I'm on social media a lot, and we see it. Your job is around social media as well, so we're seeing it all the time. And it that I don't that is what I'm going to think about. I'm not going to think about like counter programming or what programs did well for each program, each show, or who really helps individuals who help swing the war one way or another. What I think about is just the continued fractured and partisan divide I think we're seeing amongst wrestling fans. And a lot of things, to me, like a lot of the disagreements amongst wrestling fans, it can be about anything. It can be about, whether guys sell enough now, or whether, scripted promos are bad, whether you can, do intergender matches, whether you can, do wrestling this way, whether this guy can draw, all of the things that I think people debate about online basically come down to people who only watch WWE and people who watch wrestling outside of WWE. And I think
Mm-hmm.
those are the two big difference makers when it comes to setting up what I would consider a partisan divide. And I think the creation of AEW, and in particular the Wednesday Night War, has defined that because it forced fans, whether they wanted to or not, to kind of pick a camp. And I know there are people that watched both shows at the same time, which I never did because I thought that would be way too difficult and stupid, basically, and wouldn't be able to appreciate either show if I was splitting my attention between two shows. But that is ultimately what I think is that it did kind of create a further divide between those two groups of fans. And that's what I'm going to remember. I'm going to remember, going on Twitter on Thursday at 4 o'clock and looking at, usually it was Brian Alvarez, but, other people would post the ratings news and just looking at what people were saying about it. And I think for the first few months, it was really exciting. And then after that, when it became pretty clear that AEW was going to win every week, it became less exciting, and it became the same, people making the same talking points depending on what camp they were in. And that's ultimately is what I think I'm gonna remember about this.
Yeah, like you said, like AEW pretty much won every week, mostly in total viewers, but especially in the key demo. And even that became a big discussion of like the key demos and all that.
Oh yeah.
And oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like people were arguing whether it mattered or not, or like we all of a sudden talking about it. And in actuality, it just became much more trendy. That was the big thing. Like it was never trendy to talk about like WWE's key demo because you weren't comparing it to anyone else's. Like you weren't comparing Impact's key demo to WWE's. That's a mute argument, And in New Japan, they don't have a weekly TV show. So like, there's no point of arguing OT ratings between that company as well. And even Ring of Honor, like Ring of Honor just screams on Fight, which like I don't think Fight releases like occasionally, and so even then that was even an argument as well.
Yeah,
And
well,
yeah, I mean, it just became this big thing of just arguing and forth. And yeah, like you said, like people would develop their own narratives on the numbers, even though the numbers kind of remain stagnant for the most part. There would be some big dips, bumps here and there, depending on a big angle or a big show. But for the most part, they all kind of ranged around the 700,000, 600,000 mark, especially recently. Those were the numbers for both WWE's NXT and
Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit, so I don't know if you can move a little bit closer to your mic, but I understand what you're saying about the the thing about the key demos, which was a good example of this, which is I think people went in and looked at the total viewership numbers, and that was kind of how we've evaluated Raw, I guess, over the past few years or SmackDown, when there really wasn't NXT on television or AEW on TV. We looked at total viewers, but because I guess at first, NXT might, be competitive in total viewers and then, but always lose the key demo. It became more of a decisive thing because you could say, well, if you believe in total viewers, NXT is better. But if you believe in 1849, then AEW is winning. But the reality is that eventually AEW won both handily for the most part. They won 63 of the 74 weeks when it comes to total viewers, and I believe they won every single week except one when it came to the key demo. And the thing about the key demo was during the Monday Night Wars, nobody talked about the key demo. Whether it was WWF or WCW, when they would mention ratings, they talked about the rating, which isn't even really used anymore. Like the actual rating is not used anymore. The total viewers is used and the demographic ratings are used, but the total rating is like, oh, someone's doing a 4.2. Like no one talks about that anymore. And I think that was when people started talking about the key demo. I think that caught people off guard because like we never talked about the key demo before, and like you said, we never really comparing the shows to anything else. But when the Showbuzz Daily chart would come out, it ranked them by key demo performance, not by total viewers. And there's a lot of gaps in that. Like every week, the challenge would be top on Wednesday nights, and it would be ranked number one, and it would do like 700, 800,000 viewers. And then you'd look down and you'd find some cable news show that would do like 4 million viewers, but it would be ranked like 10th or 11th because it did such almost an entirely older audience. So yeah, and I think in that regards, I think fans became a lot more the average fan became a lot more educated about the TV industry and the importance of ratings and such like that, because like without any real competition, I think it became, we look at what Raw did and that was still important, and what SmackDown did and that was still important. But the idea that a company could be doing better or worse, kind of comparing it against another, I think did kind of get reinvigorated.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you also have like fans are more educated, but at the same time, we're also more educated to how the Nielsen TV system is it's very limited towards an audience, because obviously like you have the digital audience as well, you have social media as well, YouTube numbers. Like there's so many other ways to chart success, and I feel like there are too many times where like people charted AEW success solely on their TV ratings rather than what they're actually doing on their product. It was just, oh, AEW does better than TV ratings, and that's the end of the argument. But like, there's so much more to argue about, or just even to talk about between WWE and AEW, that like just limiting it to a ratings discussion really, it's not productive. Just at least from what my point of view, it's not really a productive just talk about ratings. Why you can talk about more creative discussions, or the way how AEW does market towards younger audiences, and how WWE does that as well through their other outside of TV. Like there's so many other ways to talk about the successes of each company outside of the ratings. But obviously it or on social media, at least the ratings discussion, especially like you said on Thursdays, at 4 o'clock, that would be the big talking point throughout the whole afternoon.
Yeah, and so yeah, there's a whole school of thinking that, and it's very logical, that like wrestling fans should not really care about ratings, because ultimately the success of a show, and quality is not always reflected in ratings, and that like, you can totally enjoy a show, and if it does bad in the ratings, it doesn't nullify the quality of the show. It just means it did bad in the ratings. Um, and you're right, it did probably take away from, I think, like what you said, more creative discussions and talking about, actual wrestling, talking about matches, talking about storylines, talking about character development, talking about, why we watch wrestling. And I always said, like, people who are like get really over the moon about WWE, oh, Vince McMahon, they signed $1 billion deal here and Vince McMahon's worth this amount of money. And like no one is watching wrestling to root for a stock price to go up. We're watching it for quality content. No one's like, hey, the the Knicks, only won 25 games this year, but man, James Dolan, he made a lot of money. Way to go. Things are going great. Like, no one's talking about that. So, it does. But at the same time, I think for AEW in particular, NXT ratings almost didn't matter, to be honest. They did in a sense, and to a degree, but like they don't. AEW, I will say, like, their ratings really did matter because they're a fledgling company that was trying to establish itself on television. And at the end of the day, AEW is going to exist as long as a television network is willing to pay a substantial amount of money for their show. So their ratings really were, those first 6 months were a very critical time for AEW's viability, because if those ratings tanked, then in TNT, wouldn't have been offering them the money to keep them going forward, especially during the pandemic. I mean, it's AEW signed a new TV deal in January, right before the pandemic hit, and that basically gave them the financial stability to keep going throughout the pandemic. And Tony Khan, I think, has even said that if we didn't sign that new TV deal, I don't know if we could have kept on going, with losing out on, live event ticket sales, losing out on the merchandise he would get from live events, all of that kind of stuff, missing those things with the pandemic, hurt them financially, but getting that TV deal in January really allowed them to stay alive. And so to that extent, I think that the ratings, really were important. But you're right, at the end of the day, is this, the rating discussion became really mundane and boring. It became almost the same story every week. And fans, depending on how partisan you want it to be about it, moved things around if, depending on how you wanted to see them. Like 1 million fans became, oh, AEW can't hit 1 million fans, can't do that. Like when none of that, like that was just a completely arbitrary number that people selected. I don't know. It was very strange to see that kind of development. Let's talk more about, like, I guess, like how you as a fan went through the Wednesday Night War. Did you watch both shows at the same time?
No, I mostly just watched Dynamite first and then catch NXT, like, because usually be on the network like a day later, and so I'd watch that after.
Yeah, I was the same way.
You're probably the same, right?
Yeah, and I was the same way. And sometimes, like, the NXT show would maybe be more interesting to me than Dynamite. But once I got in the habit of watching Dynamite live and, interacting with people on social media live, watching Dynamite, taking part in that aspect of being a fan, once I got in that routine, I kind of would just never watch NXT live. Like, I didn't even watch the first night of TakeOver live, even though that was on paper a much more exciting show than the Dynamite show, and I think in hindsight was a better show than the Dynamite show on Wednesday. But I watched AEW Dynamite every Wednesday, and I wasn't just gonna, break that routine because I think the NXT show is gonna be better, because I know I can watch the NXT show later. I DVR'd it. I could also watch it on the network, or now Peacock. So it was I never watched it at the same time, like some people did. I never understood that. I mean, I understood why people had to do it if you're doing like a review of both shows, but to me, it just, I can't focus like that on two different shows. What if two people are cutting a promo at the same time? Like, who am I supposed to listen to? Do I have them both going? Do I have one on mute? Do I pause one, listen to that? Like, it just, I never understood that kind of methodology, and how people could enjoy that. And I think it's for the best that the shows are going to be on different nights as far as the fan is concerned, because now you don't have to make that choice and you don't have to watch two shows at once and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, unless, you're a very hardcore AEW fan, you choose to watch, AEW Dark, before, NXT or whatever. And of course, there's this theory out there that, like, hey, NXT Evolve might air on days as well on Peacock. That could be definitely an idea there as well. But obviously those are more digital shows rather than just on television shows. But that's definitely an option out there for fans as well. There's like so much content out there between these companies that they keep pushing out more and more as they grow bigger.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a key factor is content. WWE, they come out and they say it all the time, we're a content company. We're making content. And that's really what it is. When you watch Raw and you're like, I can't believe this show is 3 hours. Why is this 3 hours? It's because of content. When you're thinking about WWE, 5 hours of television on the main roster per week on cable, you got 2 more hours for NXT. Then you got main event, you got 205 Live, you got NXT UK. It's all about just generating all of this content that you can hopefully sell to people, which WWE has done very well. And AEW is obviously, looking at that. They created a second basic version of Dark in AEW Dark Elevation, and that's aimed at generating content. And that is key in this, and it's key in this war. I mean, Dark is, I don't see Dark as like something that's going to steal viewers away from NXT really, because I think people are in the habit. Some people watch Dark live. I think a lot of people will watch it like the next day, kind of as background noise, because AEW doesn't put like a tremendous amount of effort into making you want to see Dark. And I kind of like that. Like, I kind of like that they're not like putting big matches on Dark, or they're pushing, angles and stuff like that you have to see on Dark, because I kind of like the idea that they basically give you this kind of like a placid show that you can just kind of watch on your own time. And it has a very specific kind of wrestling style, a lot of squash matches and such. That's kind of old fashioned. It's a really interesting concept. Like, they're not going out there trying to get you to watch Dark. It's like, if you want, here's more content if you want to watch some AEW this week, basically.
Though sometimes they kind of make it seem like it's required viewing. Like the QT Marshall stable. Like, I think you get a lot more fulfillment that if you watch Dark, like who Aaron Sugg is from there, and obviously like Anthony Ogogo, like he's on commentary all the time on Dark, and like just months, yeah, he was very much more of a heel commentator, mostly towards QT Marshall matches. Like, he would be defending. Even Taz would be like, "Oh, like, Anthony, what are you talking about?" Like, even Taz, like a heel, is disagreeing with Anthony Go-Go. You would have those experiences of knowing who people are, because I'm seeing a lot of reaction. People who only watch Dynamite, they're not really understanding QT Marshall and his whole stable. But if you do watch Dark, you kind of get more fulfillment out of. And so it kind of is required viewing, but like at the same time, like you said, like it is really required viewing. You can watch it at your own time if you want to.
Yeah, and I think that's, I'm not a Dark viewer, really. I'll watch it occasionally if someone really interesting is wrestling on it, like, because they bring in some like independent names, and oh, they're getting a match on Dark. If you follow independent wrestling, you'll see people come in and be like, oh, I want to see what they do, because it's obviously a big platform for them. And we've seen people debut on Dark and eventually turn into, entities on the main roster. And I kind of like the balance of, like, I'm not a viewer of Dark. I understood the QT Marshall stable like right away. I wasn't confused by it or anything like that. But I really dig the idea that you're rewarding fans who are dedicating more time to watching the show, and you're doing it in a way that I don't think alienates fans that don't watch the show. And I think that's an important balance. I think WWE, oftentimes when I describe their product, I say WWE often punishes fans for being too invested in the show, because there's an enormous amount of contradictions in storylines, feuds that start that get dropped and never mentioned again, angles that come up and never see a second chapter written in them. It's I always say, like, don't get, like, it's hard to get too attached to certain storylines, because WWE will punish you for remembering something that happened 6 months ago, and will punish you by thinking about a feud that was hinted at but never happened. And AEW, I feel like, does a better job at rewarding those fans. Like you said, if you're watching, AEW Dark, and you're seeing that kind of, like, the seeds being planted. I heard that after the feud, that's like, hey, if you watch Dark, Anthony Gogo's always been defending QT Marshall, and if you say, this happened where this guy came out and saved him, and it's very interesting. You're right, like, it's really, I think that's great for the product. But yeah, I don't know, like, if Dark's going to steal viewers from NXT. And I think, let's talk about NXT moving to Tuesdays, and I'll ask you this question: what do you think will be kind of I guess, like, to still talk about ratings, like the rating impact of NXT on Tuesday and AEW on Wednesday? Because I have kind of my own theory about it. But how do you think those shows respectively are going to do now that they're separated and on different nights?
I think there'll obviously be a because I think Wrestlenomics and Dave Meltzer, they both sort of come to the conclusion that around 2,000 viewers, or even like somewhere around that ballpark or so, are flip flopping back and forth
Yeah.
between channels. And so you're obviously going to get a jump in that. Whether it's exactly 200,000, who knows? But they'll definitely get a boost in their key demos and total viewership in terms of NXT. And I think even Brandon Thurston and Dave Meltzer have also come to the conclusion that the older viewership will go up with AEW, even though it kind of has been increasing over time these past couple of weeks as well. Even when they were head to that would probably increase even more, getting that older audience in there. But even then, like I don't see a dramatic shift in terms of viewership. Like I doubt we'll see any of these shows go up to a million viewers, like you're saying before, this arbitrary number. I doubt we'll actually get at least consistently. Like if they do a big show, like big show next week, so maybe that could break a million viewers. But I don't think consistently we'll see each show breaking a million each week.
Yeah. We're not going to see like, oh, well, the 650,000 people that watch NXT are all going to go watch Dynamite on Wednesday, and now Dynamite's going to do 1.3 million people or whatever. And yeah, look, we learned the Monday Night War, which was obviously a long time ago, that when Nitro ended, it wasn't like all of the fans who were watching Nitro just started watching Raw. And people thought that was going to happen. They'd be like, oh, the 2 million people left watching Nitro are going to all start watching Raw, and Raw's going to go from 5 million viewers to 7 million viewers. That wasn't the case. Actually, the Raw ratings, I think, actually went down over the next year. And so those WCW fans, they stopped watching. They didn't just jump to the WWF now that their show was over. And I do think that that's kind of a similar thing. I think people who were like hardcore fans, especially from NXT fans going to AEW, I think people who were like hardcore, I'm an NXT fan, don't really care about AEW. I don't think they're suddenly going to like, I care about AEW now because now it's not competing with NXT, or now I have more time to watch it because I'm around on Wednesday night and I want to watch wrestling because that's my habit. But so I don't think those people are really going to happen. I think the ratings are going to be kind of flat. I think NXT is actually going to probably do better on Tuesday nights just because I think that it will feel like new to them for they're going to be on a new night. It might be harder because they're used to being on Wednesdays at first, and I think I might be wrong here, but I think that I think AEW fans are perhaps a little more open to jumping to NXT than NXT fans are to jumping to AEW. I don't know, what do you think about that? Do you think that's accurate?
I can see that because just at least the way the companies have talked about one another. Like WWE has been very dismissive of AEW, and AEW they haven't really. Well, they just sort of acknowledge WWE is competition, but that's really the extent of the way they talk about WWE. They'll take shots here and there, but still, it just more caters to their audience, which likes that kind of stuff. But they don't really go too hard in missing WWE.
Yeah, well, I think it comes back to, unfortunately, I think it comes back to the partisanship that we've seen develop when it comes. I think there are people like who are WWE fans that might have had a potential interest in AEW, but if you're in the WWE bubble, if you're in the WWE universe, the attitude around AEW is really bad. It's constantly being mocked, buried. You've got, depending on, like who you follow on social media, who you're, what podcasts you listen to, who you think, whose wrestling opinion you value. There's an enormous amount of toxicity, and I think it might prevent some people from getting invested in AEW because if they haven't watched it yet or they haven't paid that close attention yet, they're being constantly told that this is, shit. It's all these, young guys doing a bunch of stupid flips, and there's no storytelling, and all the old, the tropes that you hear, whether it's people listening to Jim Cornette, whether it's people who are listening to very WWE, your Peter Rosenberg style people. I think it does kind of it doesn't help AEW that there's a lot of negativity coming from the WWE end. And I know that WWE fans will say, well, there's a lot of negativity coming from AEW fans on our to us as well. And that is true, but I think the big distinction is that almost anybody that is an AEW fan was a WWE fan at one point in time, if they're not still. I don't think that's the same in reverse. I don't think there's a lot of people who were once AEW fans that are now hardcore WWE fans. It doesn't exist. It's a different, the histories of the companies are so different. And I do think that creates a different dynamic because I think a lot of AEW fans are former WWE fans who really don't like the current product and have gravitated towards a new thing. And I think that's a different dynamic, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean that's basically how you marketed themselves as an alternative. Like they said alternative, but it obviously the context that like the whatever the meaning behind that is they're an alternative to WWE. Like they're an alternative to like Impact, Japan. Like as you're getting very much a similar thing with AEW as you would in Impact or New Japan. So they're obviously an alternative to WWE because that's the way they marketed themselves. There's also a dynamic of like AEW is so new and so obvious to sign people from other companies. Like that's just normal. Like you're a startup, new promotion, and so I think this idea that AEW are signing former WWE talent, there's a negative perception towards that. AEW has been around long enough for WWE to sign AEW people. Like that hasn't been a thing. It has been before, but that predates AEW. Like there's been stories of Eddie Kingston. He tried out for the Performance Center. Even a Big Swole, Sammy Guevara, Wardlow. There's so many other people have tried out before and they didn't make it. And so there's this perception like, oh, you weren't good enough to make it to WWE. Where in reality, like, they just didn't fit this corporate system, especially for I think he even joked that he probably fired, for his day in WWE because of just the way he is. And that's why, his mother, it's what he said on the record, like his mother convinced him to sign AEW because that's a better fit for him as a personality.
Sorry, who is that? You cut out right when you said that person's name. Was it Eddie Kingston?
Yeah, Eddie Kingston. Yeah, I'm saying like his mother on the record. What?
Oh yeah,
like time AEW.
Yeah, like if Eddie Kingston was, imagine Eddie Kingston doing like the scripted WWE promos. Like no. I mean, like then there are people who are probably gonna do better in different promotions. I think that AEW by obviously allowing I think a little bit more creative freedom on their end, allowing guys to be different, allowing guys to do different kind of stuff. Like, I think that help is some talent's going to be good at that, and some talent, needs maybe a more structured environment where they need to be told what to do, and they, don't get to do so. It's more controlled about what ideas you can and can't do because they might have crappy ideas that hurt them. I think that when it comes to like the prospective talent, like if you look at like NXT is full of guys who would 1000% be in AEW if they weren't in WWE. Like even if you just look at, you don't think like Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Finn Balor, Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, like all these guys were, independent stars before they came to WWE. And those are the people that AEW definitely would have signed because when AEW first started up, they gobbled up pretty much any independent star that they could get their hands on, and ranging from, the Young Bucks, in Cody Rhodes, who were, obviously big stars, to, cult people like Orange Cassidy and that kind of end. So you obviously could see kind of a different the approach is similar to it, I guess. One of the things about the Wednesday Night Wars is that I do think that, I can't say that it changed AEW because AEW has only existed within the scope of the Wednesday Night Wars, but I think it's pretty clear that it did change NXT from what NXT once was to what it is now, and I think there are certain strengths and weaknesses to that. I think a lot of people might overrate NXT's weekly television pre-Wednesday Night Wars when it was just an hour and it was on the network because it wasn't really must-see. It was, sometimes there'd be a total banger of a match and you definitely, want to go and check it out, or you might hear about something, or there'd be a hot angle or something. But a lot of times, like, it was just kind of filling time on TV, and there'd be, you didn't have the champion wasn't always in a match, or it wasn't always featured week to week. They only had an hour, they had a big roster, and they churned people around. When it became a full-fledged, the third brand, got 2 hours on USA every Wednesday, it did change the way, they started producing a show that would be more similar to Raw and SmackDown. Always have the big stars on, always have them featured, always be doing storylines, always, giving away big, huge, gigantic matches to, help pop a rating, things that you would see on Raw and SmackDown. And I think it did really change the way the shows were put together as far as what they would try to promote. They took it a lot more serious. They started taking weekly television way more seriously, which is logical because they're on cable now than they did when it was just a show on the network.
Yeah, I mean, typically NXT on USA Network, it was typically just a show to build up takeovers. That was the big marquee event for NXT. It was the takeovers. Like, you can watch NXT, that was fine. WWE, they're very good in production, creating these videos, and so a good video to really sum up this feud that was coming up on Takeover. And if you watch Takeover, you pretty much watched NXT. That was really your extent of your NXT viewing, was watching all the takeovers. And of course, there's only like 4 takeovers at first, but then as the takeovers became bigger, that's when they got like 6 takeovers, like, or even more and more now, obviously not recently the pandemic, but even before that, like there was a lot of takeovers than before because they were doing so well. They become more viral. The matches were doing well, for even people who aren't, hardcore WWE people, like people like Dave Meltzer. He was giving, the 5-star ratings, or even close to that, like 4.5 stars. These big takeovers match even got more viral even more, and so that's why it became a very formulaic type of show when it became on the network. But after that, like you said, they gave away big title matches to try to pop a rating. Like some big title changes happened on USA NXT rather than on a regular WWE network. They rarely do a title change on those shows.
Yeah, well, the big one I think was I can't remember. Was it Keith Lee? It was Keith Lee versus, was it Gargano? I'm trying to think they had the huge unification match.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like literally the biggest match they could do. Like the biggest, like if you were to say, what is the biggest match NXT can do right now? You would say, like a Keith Lee, winning the world title for the NXT title for the first time. And he's a dual champion. He unified all the belts. He did this thing that no one else ever did. That was the biggest match. And they put it on free television. And it was pretty clear is because they wanted to try to pop a rating. I think over time, I think NXT has actually kind of reverted back to, after it became clear that they weren't going to win, basically. People have said, oh, they gave up. I don't think they gave up, but I do think that they became less interested in like intensely counter programming and trying to win each a week. They put together some like specials that did really well and they put big matches, but I don't have a problem with that, that kind of idea. But they kind of stopped hot-shotting things like they were doing earlier. You look back to the first few months, we're talking about Becky Lynch and I think Roman Reigns, these people coming down. NXT, there was a quote. I don't know if you saw the quote. I forget who specifically it was. I don't think it was Nick Khan, but it was somebody in WWE. But it was an article on CNBC about WWE and their deal with Peacock. And someone was quoted from WWE talking about AEW, and they said, "Oh, they're not real competition for us because they're like they were competing with our G League."
Mm-hmm.
Basically saying they're competing with developmental, which I always thought is has become a talking point was a talking point for WWE partisan fans for a while. Oh, it's just developmental. It doesn't matter that AEW is being NXT. It's just developmental. But this was someone from WWE like corporate saying, oh, it's just our developmental. And it's like, you guys when this thing was first started, you had NXT, as a third brand on Survivor Series, and you put them over all the other brands on Survivor Series. You had them stand tall at Survivor Series to try to establish NXT as being this big brand. You still lost, and now it's gone to, well, it's just developmental, which, as we were talking about a little bit before, like NXT is not developmental. Everyone on NXT has been like if you look at the Takeover show from last night, Stand and Deliver Night 2, like almost everyone has been a wrestler for like at least 10 years, like a ton of experience. Like Finn Balor is this like, I think he's 39 or 40. This guy's been wrestling for like almost 20 years. He had like a long illustrious career in Japan, but he's been in WWE for like I don't know, 6 or 7 years now. Like he's not developing. Like it's not developmental. He's your champion. He's not, in developmental. Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole are not in developmental. Kushida is not in developmental. Santos Escobar, he's not in developmental. Some people, I think, are someone uh, Gonzalez, Rana Gonzalez is Raquel Gonzalez. She's clearly like someone who's probably in that more of a developmental stage in her career, but she's kind of the exception. Everyone else is pretty much someone that's been a wrestler for 10 years. So it's one of those things where, that just became the one of the it's developmental, and it's like WWE kind of put varying interests in NXT. I think there was a time when they wanted to make it as big as possible, and they had main roster stars going there, and they were hot-shotting angles. And I think over the last maybe 3 or 4 months, they've kind of reeled it in and focused more on takeovers and focused more and have been less concerned about winning a week-to-week battle that they were struggling to win.
Yeah, I forget her position in WWE, but the person that you're talking about is Christine Salen. She's the one that said those quotes.
Yeah, I think she's an executive vice president. She was hired last year or earlier this year, I think, as I think it's like her and Nick Khan are kind of sharing different roles, similar to a George Barrios, Michelle Wilson scenario. I don't think it's quite the exact same dynamic, but it's similar. She's a big executive, and yeah. So you're right. You read it too, and ironically, you just transcribed the Stephanie McMahon, Bill Simmons interview where Bill Simmons asked about AEW, and Stephanie uses the word competition like 600 times in one sentence. She's like, everything is competition. So anything that's competing for eyeballs is competition for us. And she said like it was competition like 100 times. And then you got this other person that's like, oh, they're not real competition. They're competing with, our minor league brands.
Well, it just shows like, how corporate WWE is. Like, people rarely talk about the stuff in meetings. Everyone's too busy doing other stuff, and so that's why everyone's saying one thing and another person says another thing. And I think that just goes into like just speaking on Stephanie's comments. I think that just more speaks to how WWE brands itself as entertainment. They're competing in the entertainment industry, whereas AEW, they're competing in the wrestling industry. And I think that's where the distinctions come in between how WWE views AEW. Like in terms of entertainment, sure, like AEW isn't a big brand in entertainment, and you can see they're changing that with Cody and Brandy's, reality show. Like they want to branch out more, like you said, like bring out this content machine. They want to bring out more content for viewers, and this reality show on TNT, it's going to be bring out different viewers for Cody and Brandy, to see their lives, and especially Brandy, pregnant right now, parents. That's going to be a big thing. Pharaoh and forget what the other dog's name is, but obviously they're going to be big stars as well. And so obviously, this is all part of this content machine going to be, leaning towards an entertainment realm that WWE has dominated for the past couple of decades.
Yeah, I mean, people. I don't think I've ever seen an episode of Total Divas before or Total Bellas before, and people who are like hardcore wrestling fans, like, oh, it's so stupid. They got a dumb reality show on E, and it's like those shows helped, the women's division in WWE, and they helped bring new viewers in. People who have no interest in watching wrestling would watch, shows on E or shows on Bravo or any of those kind of like, networks that cater a lot towards women with the reality drama kind of series. It was a great avenue for them to introduce, even if they're not tuning into Raw every week, they're aware of who these wrestlers are. And that's a win if you're WWE. And I think it's a fine idea if you're AEW. I think it's funny when people will basically say, "Oh, TNT is going to be disappointed in AEW. This is their ratings now, and they can't be happy." And it's like TNT they're giving AEW another show. Apparently, we don't know when that's exactly going to happen, but there's going to be another show on AEW. Turner put Cody on the Go Big show, which was a big investment for them, and promoted him a lot. He's now getting another show like. TNT's like the Cody network now. He's going to be on all the time. So I think we can say that they're pretty satisfied with what they're getting out of AEW at least. And it'll be interesting to see like if their ratings pop back up. What do you think about? I think we talked about this a little bit about when it came to counter programming. Do you think this changes? And the AEW said that it's not going to change them. Do you think that this changes? Not competing with one another will change like the approaches to NXT and AEW respectively, as far as knowing that they don't have to compete with um, each other head to head. And they say, oh, we're not doing this. But even as recently as this week, NXT obviously had a gigantic show. I don't think it was a coincidence that Mike Tyson showed up, the week of NXT's giant show. So even in very recent, we can see that there are kind of looking at what the competition is doing. Do you think that changes at all now that or is it still just a race for eyeballs? Even if there's not another wrestling show on at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's just more of the latter situation. Like you said, Mike Tyson all of a sudden shows up on like the same night as the night one of Takeover.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not a coincidence. And then like all of a sudden they're just building up this Jericho Tyson story, even though like for months Tyson has not appeared on anything at all. And it's just so fast. He maybe again maybe next week we'll answer our questions, but even then next week Mike Tyson's going to be back on again. It's some what he's going to do, whether that's going to lead to anything, who knows. But yeah, like instead of competing against each other now, they're just now focused on growing their product even more, especially for AEW as a new promote. They just want to grow even more, and this might even embolden them to do more crazy booking and more of this high-profile type stuff later on. I mean, even Shaq, like his storyline, he just disappeared in the ambulance. Like they still have to, pick that back up at some points, and so Shaq might appear on a and that just helped grow their viewers even more, especially if
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And like I said, NXT I think took their foot off the gas a little bit when it came from constantly trying to counter program, and they kind of I think once they realized that they probably weren't never going to win the key demo. And they didn't even win it on Wednesday night, even though they did win the total viewers, but they didn't win despite having just a really big loaded show. But and I think they did, and I think it will put NXT in a better position on Tuesday. Whether it's Triple H or Shawn Michaels, whoever's booking NXT, whether they were obsessed with winning the night, or whether it was Vince or someone else WWE obsessed with trying to win on Wednesdays. That pressure should be off them, and they should be in a better position, I think, to produce a product. I think the key element with NXT. If you're just a regular fan of the show, one of the things you would have noticed since, going to USA is that the call ups of people when they had kind of achieved what they were supposed to achieve in NXT, they would get called up to the main roster. That has not happened at the same rate. People like Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole and Tommaso Ciampa have been on NXT much longer than anyone would have anticipated, in prior incarnations. It used to be like if you were a big star, you come in NXT, maybe do a year, maybe do 18 months, but then you're moving up. You're not sticking around forever. You can, Sami Zayn, Shinsuke Nakamura, Kevin Owens, Samoa Joe, Balor the first time. The list goes on and on about the NXT guys get called up, and I think it created, now in once they moved to Wednesday nights, and once it became, or moved to cable, it became really important to have established stars that people recognized. So you wouldn't want to take a Johnny Gargano off your show or an Adam Cole off your show because you were relying on those guys to deliver, and you didn't want to necessarily take the time to build up new stars to replace them like you would in the past when the show was just on the network. And I think it's created, some people will say, I don't really have a strong opinion either way. I think there's an argument to say that NXT is better having the established talent and being able to tell, stories about Adam Cole over, years and years, and not just, cramming his entire run into 18 months. But at the same time, I do think, I think Gargano is a good example of someone who I think has suffered from kind of just being on NXT for so long, and I think he turned heel and he's got a whole new character, and for me it's just not working the way it would used to, his old character, and how he feels like he's cooler than he was previously. But he had to do something because he had done everything in NXT as a babyface. The only thing left to do was to turn heel, and it's because, and if he wasn't being counted on to help boost the ratings on Wednesday night in this war, I think we would have saw him, get called up to the main roster, and he might have been, he'd probably be wasted on the main roster, but he would have, been able to I guess, take a step forward as opposed to what it feels like has been taking a step back. What do you think about that?
I agree in that there are a lot of guys overstayed their welcome, and like I do appreciate at least with Johnny Gargano, they're at least using him in a faction with the way of trying to build up younger guys and younger stars like Indy Hartwell is obviously paired up with who is a veteran in her own right, and Austin Theory is paired off with our Gargano. Ironically, Dexter Lumis is part of their feud, even though I think Dexter Lumis is like in his mid-30s, right? Like he's not really a young guy per
Oh,
se.
all these people, almost with the exception of Austin Theory, like all these people, and people in NXT are older than you think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's mostly just because they're very much in shape and like they don't really look like that. Oh, like you mentioned Finn Balor. Like Finn Balor's like almost 40. Even though he looks like the same age as Adam Cole and Kyle O'Reilly.
It's TV years. People who have not been on people have not been on television for a while. People just assume that they're young. Like I think Damian Priest is like 39 years old. And I think a lot of people probably would be like, oh yeah, Damian Priest is probably 25.
Yeah, something like that.
So I agree that well, that goes back into what's developmental and what's not developmental. But yeah, I think with Gargano, it's going to be I think it's a challenge. I think someone described what Gargano was like he's like that 5th-year senior or the guy who graduated but still hangs around high school. It just kind of feels like his presence is redundant and like and the flip side of that is that. If these guys did go to the main roster, they probably wouldn't be used well. And in fact, I think it's been reported that a lot of these guys prefer to stay in NXT. They're comfortable there. They're booked well. They're going to be pushed prominently. I think that's something that's alluring to these people. And I know the pay scale I think differs, but maybe we don't have all the information on that. The general principle is that you make a lot more money on the main roster than you do in NXT. But with NXT now on television, I think maybe the contracts have changed a little bit. So people like, Gargano and Cole are making bigger money than they would have if NXT was just still on streaming exclusively. But I do think that it has, created this kind of interest. NXT, one of the things that made NXT hot and made it so cool was that it had this unbelievable churn of talent and no one ever got stale and there was always a hot new program and everyone was always excited for the new person to come in because they would have this, they'd sign someone who was a big name, they'd come in, they were super talented, they'd be put in a big program, they'd win the title, then before they had a chance to get stale or the chance to be booked to look poor or inadequate, they would get out and they'd be replaced by another hot name who would go through the similar path, and you never had to deal with. No one ever got stale in NXT. It never happened because they turned through people so fast, and especially compared to the main roster where you're looking at the same people in the main events over and over and over again for years and years at a time. It really helped NXT stand out as a cool new product that felt like everything moved at this incredible pace and there was always something new and exciting happening. And now that's just not the case. You have, it's the same kind of people on every takeover show, and those people are good and the matches are good, and they'll sprinkle in a new person every now and then. On this takeover show last night, they gave Jonah Rock, who's been around for like a few years, but they gave him not Jonah Rock, what's his name now? Bronson Reed.
Yep.
They gave Bronson Reed like a legit match at TakeOver and let him have, really showcase himself. He didn't win, so they do sprinkle that in, but it is kind of like, got to have the big Johnny Gargano match, got to have the big Adam Cole match, got to have the big Finn Balor match, and those guys are all great, but it's kind of the same thing, and that's different than what I think originally kind of got NXT off the ground, which was that this incredible churn of talent.
Yeah, he gave him with for the women's division. Like you see the same women every week all at the same time. They're all great, and once in a while they'll switch around the feuds. Like instead we'll call Gonzalez. She just won the title, but at times Ember Moon was fighting for the title, and even Candice, she had her shot at the title. Toni Storm had a shot at the title, and so there's always the same amount of women fighting for the title at the same time, and everyone brags about how great NXT's women's division is, and if you put out a list of it, it is true. But at the same time, on television, we're not really seeing that. Even Tian Sha, with Xia Li, they're still building her up, but still at the same time, like it's not like she's in line for the title. It seems like they're going to take their time with her, even other talents they have now, like Zoe Stark and all that. Like they're taking their time with them while everyone else just dominates the main event scene for the couple months that they're on.
Mm-hmm. And there's something to be said for taking your time and like knowing you don't have to push anyone right away. But NXT did kind of make its bones on pushing people right away and bringing, like, when they had a hot signing, and like you wouldn't sign. They did do this from time to time, and it did bother me. Like when they signed Dominic Dijakovic, like he wasn't on TV for like 18 months. Like he was just kind of around, and I was like, dude, what happened to Donovan Dijak? Like, why is he like? Why do we never see him anymore? And eventually, he did get to NXT TV. But in general, they didn't sign Kevin Owens, and then like he was like, in a mid card feud, or he was like missing takeovers, and a year later he finally made the roster. They're like Kevin Owens I think he showed up in like the after a main event at a takeover. If I know Samoa Joe did a similar thing. He showed up like at the end of a takeover, but like you weren't they pushed people right away, and that was kind of the charm of NXT. And now it does seem like it's similar to the main roster, where someone has to be around for 300 years before they receive a push, as opposed to maybe striking when the iron is hot. Like they can, they brought back Bobby Lashley, basically kept him around in the mid card for 2 years, and then finally gave him a real push. That's even someone like people say they're going to push Cesaro now as an example. Like Cesaro's been around forever. Like why didn't you push Cesaro in 2010 when you signed him for the first time? Now he's finally getting his main event run. Like it's just a different dynamic. I think it worked for NXT, and now you're seeing kind of the main event run. What we would see on the main roster happen in NXT a little bit more often. Io Shirai, for example, if she was like, there's in the old NXT, pre cable television NXT, she would 100% be going to the main roster after she lost the title.
Yep.
I don't know if that's going to be the case. I could see her staying in NXT, and she's going to have to take a step down on the card. And I don't know if that's something that you probably want to avoid doing. If she went to the main roster, she would be taking a clear step up. She could be dropped right into a feud with, whoever you want on the main roster. It could be, Sasha Banks, Bianca Belair, Rhea Ripley, Charlotte, Asuka, any of those people. That would be a step up for her. Instead, if they're counting on, oh, you're right, we're not moving you up to the main roster, we still need you on NXT because you're an established star, who's she going to feud with? She's going to feud with Xia Li, and nothing against Xia Li, but that's a step down for Io Shirai. We're used to seeing her as the champion. Now she's in the mid card feud, and I don't know. It's a different dynamic for how they promote their talent.
And even then, like WWE call ups, they're kind of random. Like Keith Lee got a call up.
Yeah, well, that was one of the things about the people who were called up from NXT were not like. Keith Lee is actually kind of the exception, because for the most part, they were not like the biggest stars in NXT. They were people that were deemed yes, they might be able to succeed on the main roster, but what they really are is they're expendable from NXT. Damian Priest is a good example of a guy who was a mid-card guy in NXT, but he's someone that they could take off the NXT, wouldn't make or break the show, wasn't one of the biggest stars, and put him on the main roster. But it kind of felt backwards, because in theory, you should take your top guy and move him up to the bigger platform. Instead, they were taking people that they thought they could, they're expendable from NXT. Let's get them up on the main roster and see what they can do. Riddle kind of felt like feels like a similar situation. He never really got like a big NXT title run. He just was a kind of in the mid card. You're going up. Apollo Crews, another example of a guy who just kind of got summoned up, without really, I guess, like achieving being a big star. I mean, you can look at a lot of the women that they've called up. They haven't been calling up, Candice LeRae or Io Shirai, or they finally called Rhea Ripley up probably, a few years after they probably should have in the first place. But you're right. The people that they get called up seem to be completely random. But I think the reality is that it's because they're deemed expendable from NXT.
Well, even like NXT is still seen as like we mentioned before, a developmental brand by those who matter, at least those who make the decisions. And then Triple H gets asked on this media calls, like, oh, is this person getting caught up? And it's like, oh, more or less, he says, I don't know. Like it's not in my hands.
Mm-hmm.
It's always big. Like he's not in the in the room making the decisions of like, well, you want Johnny Gargano? Look, we'll set him up for you. It's like, no, it's like we want Johnny Gargano. It's like that one time Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa.
They did get called up.
Yeah, it was just random. Like they had no plans for them. Aleister Black, Ricochet got put in a tag team, and then they just had no plans after that.
Didn't they? Do I recall this correctly, that they had like splitting up team DIY in NXT, and then they like were just called up on the main roster as a tag team, and um, you were supposed to accept that like they didn't, you know, that they were still friends, and you forget about their split up in NXT because on the main roster that they're a tag team now again, and that was
Well,
short lived.
I think a big thing was that I think they were a tag team, but they were still like they were building up like friction within a tag team. Like it was like a reluctant tag team at NXT, but on the main roster, they were baby faces. They got along,
Right.
and like their
Yeah.
whole story was just forgotten about. That was the big thing. Like they were still a tag team, but like the whole story between their friction was not mentioned at all. They're just baby
Yeah.
faces.
And that's an example of what I was saying earlier of WWE punishing fans for watching NXT and for paying attention to it. Like that's a good example of just like if you didn't watch NXT and you never watched it, you would just be like, "Oh yeah, these guys are a great tag team. I'm glad I'm watching this." But because you had invested some time in NXT, you're like, "This makes no sense. I hate it." Um, yeah, and I wonder, no, NXT is gonna start this NXT Elevation. No, is it called NXT
Evolve.
Evolve? Oh man, that's gonna get confusing with AEW Dark Elevation and NXT Evolve. Now, that will be interesting because from the looks of it, it seems kind of like developmental for NXT, and would seem to, from my understanding, will seem to function in a way um, similar to uh, what people want NXT, what people think NXT actually is developmental, where they're going to be using wrestlers who are legitimate developing wrestlers. They're people who haven't wrestled for 10 years. They're people who are trained at the performance center that need to have reps, whether it's on television or in the ring. And I'll be interested to see how that develops because um, WWE had a relationship with Evolve, the company, the Gabe Sapolsky company, and they would send NXT talent to Evolve shows, and the basis around that was that they wanted to expose their talent to like real independent wrestling, not WWE's version of independent wrestling. They wanted to have them really out on the independents because they felt like, and I thought that was a great idea, and Evolve got a lot more popular. I remember I went to a Evolve show kind of pre their relationship with WWE, and there were, it was very much a very indie wrestling crowd. A lot of people who were fans of Ring of Honor or New Japan Pro Wrestling, watching these guys. And then I went like a year or two later in the same venue. There was a lot more people there, and it was clear it was like a WWE crowd and an NXT crowd, and the talent was different. And they had, I think, I don't know, did you ever go to Evolve in Melrose?
No, I never went to those shows.
Yeah, so they had the Street Profits, and I think the Street Profits were the Evolve Tag Team Champions at the time, and they
That's
wrestled.
right.
I don't think who they wrestled. Oh, I think they wrestled Joey Gacy and um, who's the other guy?
Was Jaka in that tag team?
No, no, that sounds right, but Jack, I know it was Joey Gacy and I'm trying to think who it was. It was one of the. I'm trying to think who it was an older bald wrestler, but I can't remember who it was. It
Oh, was
wasn't
it
Chris.
JD Drake?
No, it wasn't J.D. Rake. It wasn't Chris Dickinson. It was Joe Gacy, and I'm trying to think. Joey Gacy was like the sidekick to this other main guy who I just can't. The point is that I'm not gonna try to remember this Evolve card. The point is that they had like those guys in the show. Ricochet was. I saw the Velveteen Dream, Orange Cassidy main event was at an Evolve show, but the point was they had these kind of greener guys. They were looking to get reps on the independents and put them in those kind of situations. And I think it has the name NXT Evolve right in its name. I think that's going to be what they're going to try to go for. And I think it'll be interesting to see how seriously they push it. If it's going to be just kind of like a show, like kind of like how AEW treats Dark, where you can watch it if you want, but it's not really that important to understand the overall canon of our product. But what do you think about NXT Evolve as like just an overall? Like, are you excited about it? Are you going to watch it?
I might catch it once in a while. I think I'm gonna treat it like NXT UK, where like if there's a big match, I'll watch it, but it's not something I'm looking forward to every week. Like
Mm-hmm.
NXT UK has some talents that I like. Obviously, Walter is on that show, and obviously Ilya Dragunov and Walter, had the crazy match there. But still, at the same time, it's like it's not really like entertainment viewing. Like I'm not really into that
Yeah, it's like if something gets
product.
buzz, you'll turn it on, and
Yeah,
then
for sure.
yeah, I think that's different. NXT UK has like legit like world class talent on it,
Hmm.
and it's treated like the people who are on NXT UK brand are treated like they're legitimately like this is my like the NXT UK title is the biggest thing, and they have people who are legitimately as good as anyone else in the world. You know, like Walter being the a good example of that, but also like Tyler Bate. You know, when Pete Dunne was there, they've got a pretty strong women's division too. Like NXT UK, like I feel like those are a lot of veteran established top talents that just happen to be like this UK version. Basically, WWE tried to kill the NXT, the UK independent scene, which
Yeah.
they kind of succeeded in doing. There was a number of other factors that involved, including the pandemic and speaking out, but that was the idea behind NXT UK. And with the NXT Evolve show, it seems more like they're going to try to push like people who you maybe haven't heard of before. Like WWE has been through a big signing burst where they were acquiring all this independent talent. A lot of it was some old Evolve talent, like
Hmm.
I'll use like Harlem Bravado. I'll use an example of a guy that they signed, and Harlem Bravado is a competent professional wrestler, but he's not someone that I think anyone ever saw and was like, oh yeah, he should be like, on Raw, or he should be like getting a push on Diamond. He's just kind of he's okay. I feel and there was a lot of guys kind of that fit that mold that they were picking up from Evolve. And they signed those guys, and I was like, it's kind of weird they're signing like literally anybody that has any experience. But then they announced the NXT Evolve show, and I figured, okay, they're signing these guys because they want to have some veteran, capable workers to work with their, green ex-football players, ex-amateur wrestlers, ex-track and field stars to work with, on this NXT Evolve show. And I think that's what we're going to see is we're going to see, who's it, Parker Bordeaux? Is that
Yeah.
his name?
Hmm.
He's going to be like, we're going to see him, and he's going to be, suplexing poor Harlem Bravado or uh, Anthony Green or some of these other guys that they brought in uh, and I think that's going to be kind of the point of that show. But I don't see it as like a show where like if you like want to see like a 5-star match, I don't think those are going to be happening on the show. I think it's going to be just a way to get these people in front of the TV before they're good enough to reach NXT, which was supposed to be kind of what NXT was in its original form, was supposed to be getting people ready to be on Raw and SmackDown instead of it's kind of being like WWE's little indie that they use as an alternative for fans who don't like the main roster, which is essentially what NXT is.
Yeah, even like I think it's gonna be like some of the AEW Dark. Like it's just gonna be a ton of matches. Like I doubt we'll see any sort of entertainment value from this. Maybe guys will get reps on the mic, but that's really the extent. Any sort of like narrative building see on NXT Evolve. Like I think it's just like you said, like there's a vehicle for Parker Burdo or even this new guy Gable Stevenson's to get some more in their work.
Yeah. I think the thing about Gable Stevenson is I don't know when he's gonna like start in the company because he can't start before the Olympics, and we don't know like if he's gonna try to stay in the Olympics after 2021 or anything like that. So I don't know when he's coming. He's clearly coming to WWE, which I think is actually unfortunate. I like to see him go somewhere where they could like someone to a place that actually produces talent that comes across as stars. If he went to AR Fox's school, um, and of course, there's no reason why they couldn't bring in AR Fox in to train, since he's basically all of his entire students are either in AEW or AR Fox is the best trainer in wrestling right now. I just went over this big project where I'm looking at where wrestlers were trained, and like so much talent's coming out of Atlanta right now, and it's because of AR Fox and QT Marshall too. But anyway, that's beside the point. Just kind of gonna wrap things up. You got anything else you want to say about the Wednesday Night Wars as the sun is set on them?
No, I think we kind of mentioned before of NXT Evolve, AEW Dark. Like, there's always going to be some type of thing going on. Even AEW's new TNT show, like that's probably gonna run on Fridays. I'm assuming because Tony Khan owns a football team, and so Thursdays is out of the question there. And TNT they have
Mhm.
basketballs on Thursday too, and so Friday seems to be that. So that's gonna be another type of war going on there between SmackDown and where this new AEW TNT show is. And so, we're always going to be talking about WWE versus AEW no matter what. though they don't NXT 8 Dynamite don't run head to head, but still it's been a lot of fun. All these hotshot angles, they've been a lot of successes. Most of these have been duds, like they've been good, but
Yeah.
the only problem is just like, oh, like they've been happening at the time. That's the only problem. Like we can't watch it all at the same time. That's the only problem with these big hotshot angles.
Yep. Yeah, no, I agree. You're right. The angles really haven't been duds. They just feel like they've been hot-shotted, and NXT established itself as at a certain pace of storytelling that has been ramped up, and that might not be. It hasn't always been a bad thing. I mean, I think most people still think that NXT is high quality. I think it's a high quality show most of the time. I think week to week, it's maybe it varies depending on what kind of matches they have, but it's still high quality, and I think maybe with a little bit less competitive focus, more focus on what they're building their own brand, will probably benefit both companies. So that's it. Thanks a lot for everyone tuning in. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We don't know what we're going to talk about yet, but we will let people know. And thanks a lot for everyone. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what your thoughts were on the Wednesday Night War, and we will see you soon.